There's a federal court file in New Jersey with two names sharing the same case caption. One of them is Vincent Gigante, the boss of the Genovese crime family, the man who shuffled around Greenwich Village in a bathrobe and slippers for years, faking mental illness so the government couldn't lay a finger on him. The other name on that case is a trucking company, New England Motor Freight. And the prosecutor whose office put both of those names on the same document went on to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States. That's not a rumor somebody stitched together decades later. It's in the record. In 1988, when the government moved against corruption inside Teamster's Local 560, New England Motor Freight and its owner, Myron Shevell, were named right alongside the Genovese leadership. The United States Attorney for New Jersey at the time was Samuel Alito. Samuel Alito. Now, before anyone runs too far with it, Shevell was never convicted of a thing. The case against him was civil, not criminal. It never went to trial, it settled, and he admitted no wrongdoing. He wasn't a made man, and nobody serious ever said he was. But what the government put on paper wasn't nothing. The allegation was that this trucking company and organized crime had a working relationship, and that only starts to make sense once you see how a company like this got as big as it did in the first place. Because here's the part the obituaries leave out. New England Motor Freight was a union shop. In the Northeast, in less than truckload freight, that almost always meant Teamsters. And through the 70s and 80s, Teamster LTL carriers were dropping dead one after another, gutted by deregulation, unable to touch the cost structure of the non-union outfits coming up behind them. NEMF didn't die, it grew. And the court record shows part of the reason why. By the mid-80s, out of somewhere around 130 men working the company's docks and driving its trucks, only 13 were actually inside the Local 560 bargaining unit. 13. The rest of the work got pushed onto owner-operators and contract cartage outfits, men who weren't on the Teamster pension, weren't on the Teamster welfare plan, and didn't cost the company what a full union barn would cost. If you ever leased your truck to an outfit that ran that way, you already know how it worked. You carried your own truck, your own costs, your own risk, and the company carried a whole lot less. Think about what that does to a strike. A union with 13 members inside your operation can't really hurt you. If all 13 walked off tomorrow, the freight still moves. The government went further than that in its filings. It alleged that union officials worked with Shevell to sabotage grievances, to quietly kill worker complaints before they could ever grow teeth. Take that as proven or don't. It was never proven in a criminal court, but the structure speaks for itself. This was a union carrier, where the union had almost no leverage at all. And then Shevell did something almost nobody else in trucking did. He got rid of the Teamsters entirely. In 1981, NEMF pulled out of the National Master Freight Agreement, the contract that set the terms for most Teamster freight in the country. Over time, the company's union men ended up represented not by the Teamsters, but by the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. The Machinists, the union of Boeing plants and aircraft lines and Harley-Davidson, not a trucking union at all. Read the obituaries, and it plays like a hero story. The one operator who wasn't intimidated by the Teamsters, who beat them at their own game. Read the court file from a few years earlier, and those Teamster years look a good deal less clean. Both versions are in the record. The tension between them is the man. What isn't in dispute is the result. While Teamster LTL carriers folded by the dozen, the big names a lot of these drivers came up under, going dark one after another, this one kept expanding. A union carrier that had quietly pulled the teeth out of its own union outlived nearly every giant that hadn't. So how does a company that survived all of that, deregulation, the collapse of the Teamster LTL model, 40 years in the worst freight lane in America, how does it end up filing for bankruptcy in 2019? If you read the headlines when it happened, you already think you know. Amazon. The story went that NEMF got locked into a brutal contract hauling for Amazon, that the retailer squeezed the margins down to nothing, and the old regional carrier just couldn't take it. That story is mostly wrong. The company's own chief operating officer, Thomas Connery, said flatly that Amazon was a top 5 customer making up less than 6% of total revenue. Less than 6%. Shevell himself pushed back on the idea he'd been trapped. He pointed out there was a 90-day exit clause written into every contract and said Amazon had actually made NEMF a sharper carrier. A freight analyst looking at the whole thing called the bankruptcy an anomaly and made the obvious point. If an account can't carry itself, piling more freight onto it doesn't save you. Amazon wasn't the killer. Amazon was the symbol. What actually killed New England motor freight was structural, and every man who ran the Northeast already knows the shape of it. This was a high-cost union carrier operating in the most congested, most expensive, most miserable freight corridor in the country. Anybody who ran less than truckload up and down the Interstate 95 corridor knows exactly what that means. Short city hauls, packed docks, tolls, traffic, and 100 little terminals all fighting over the same freight. The margins were thin in that world before anyone even showed up to compete. Then, starting in 2017, Saia came into the region hard, 10 new terminals to open, with 6 more planned behind them. And the price pressure got worse. NEMF bled through 2 straight years of losses, and it did that during 2018, one of the best years the trucking industry had seen in a long time. When you're losing money in a good year, the business is already finished. It just hasn't said so out loud yet. And here's where it turns, one last time. In 2018, the machinists, the union Shevell had brought in to replace the Teamsters, voted down a contract proposal that included changes to overtime pay. One consultant who followed the company closely believed that contract, had it passed, might have kept NEMF out of bankruptcy. That's his read, not a fact you can drive a nail through. But sit with the irony anyway. The man who spent an entire career making sure no union could ever hold real leverage over him was, at the very end, helped over the cliff in part by a union vote. And the men who worked there never saw the end coming. When the shutdown hit, workers said they'd gotten no warning at all, a violation, they argued, of the federal law that requires big employers to give notice before mass layoffs. That fight never got decided in front of a judge. But under the pressure of it, the severance pool climbed, from an opening offer of $13 million up to $15.7 million, covering somewhere around 2,500 employees who then dropped the suit, which leaves the man himself. The company traced its roots to 1918, hauling crackers for Nabisco, at least according to the story it always told about itself. Some veteran trucking writers will tell you that founding date is more company legend than documented fact, so take it as the tale NEMF like to tell. Shevell's own start is better attested, and it's a better story anyway. He got his beginning on a pickle truck, running his father's fleet out of Perth Amboy at 14 years old, no license, hauling seafood. The family had been in the trucking business going back to the Prohibition years, when the cargo of choice was liquor. A kid moving freight before he was legally old enough to drive the truck he was driving. He opened his annual company addresses with Frank Sinatra's My Way. His brother and first partner, Dan Shevell, this from a reporter who covered the family firsthand, shot himself after an oversized bid to swallow a much larger carrier back in 1975 collapsed both companies at once. New England Motor Freight filed for bankruptcy in 2019, 1 year after its 100th anniversary. Myron Shevell died 3 years after that, in 2022, at 87. Among the family that survived him was his daughter Nancy and her husband, Shevell's son-in-law, Sir Paul McCartney.